From the dawn of history, humanity has sought answers in the vast and scorching lands of the Middle East, a revered territory imbued with tales, sorrows, and broken promises. There, where the sun rises over Jerusalem in the desert, each dawn brings with the specter of an ancient struggle, Jews and Arabs, confronting each other century after century in a conflict that seems to have no end. But have you ever wondered why harmony always eludes these hands? Why, despite sharing origins and ancestors, two brotherly communities are compelled to view each other with suspicion and distrust. Behind every contention, every failed dialogue, and every border stained with suffering lies a much deeper reality, a truth inscribed in the hearts of human beings and on the pages of sacred scriptures. This chronicle is not merely political, nor is it just about territory. It is spiritual in nature, it is prophetic, and was recorded millennia ago when two lineages, Isaac and Ishmael, unknowingly sealed the future of entire nations. Today, you will not only delve into the narrative of the confrontation. Today I invite you to unveil the enigma that few know, the sacred source that amalgamates and separates Jews and Arabs, the forgotten prophecy about the outcome of their dispute, and the expectation of a peace that seems unattainable. Because what is at stake is not just the dominion of a territory, but the spiritual future of humanity. Join me until the end. What you are about to hear could forever transform your perception of the universe and faith. The true story begins now. The primal affliction, the emergence of discord. Hope seemed conceivable under the firmament of an ancient world. Abraham journeyed, guided by a promise. He would be the progenitor of multitudes, the patriarch of a lineage blessed by the divine. However, in his dwelling, the night stretched long and heavy, for the infertility of Sarah, his wife, was an open wound, a silence that hurt more than the desert itself. In the desperation of the passing years, Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of history. She gave her husband Hagar, her Egyptian servant. From that act, Ishmael was born, Abraham's first son. But the advent of Ishmael, far from bringing solace, unleashed a storm of envy, insecurities, and resentment. Sarah saw in Ishmael a reminder of her suffering, and Hagar, in her maternal pride, could no longer conceal her disdain. It was at that instant that the first fissure manifested among Abraham's descendants. The Bible recounts how Hagar, humiliated and rejected, took refuge in the desert, carrying within her the seed of a nation. There, on the brink of extinction, when all hope seemed to vanish, she was found by a divine emissary. An angel spoke to her by a spring in the scorching silence of the desert. "Return, for I will multiply your offspring until they are innumerable. Your son will be called Ishmael, because God has heard your affliction." But along with the promise came a prophecy that would resonate through the centuries. He will be like a wild donkey among men. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will dwell in conflict with all his brothers. This was not a reproach, but the sign of a free, untamed spirit, capable of resisting all oppression, but also marked by the destiny of coexisting amidst tensions and conflicts. In this way, Ishmael came into the world to be the patriarch of an indomitable lineage, the precursor clans who inhabit the desert and carry with them the seal of resistance and pride. Abraham, watching his firstborn grow, felt the relief of the promise fulfilled. However, the seed of discord had already been sown. What began as a family experience transformed into the imperceptible root of a problem that, thousands of years later, still fragments entire nations. Isaac and Ishmael, two brothers, two paths, and an ancestral wound that persists in the heart of humanity. Prophecy in family history. Mazaj Abat Simon Elbanim. The deeds of the fathers are premonition. There is no affliction or determination in the existence of the patriarchs that is not repeated as an eternal echo in the future of their descendants. This is the teaching veiled in the ancient wisdom of the Hebrew people. Mazaj Abat Simon Elbanim. The actions of the progenitors are prophetic omens for the offspring. Every sorrow, every exile, every agreement or schism in the lives of Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, and Ishmael is more than a past event. It is a sacred blueprint of all that is yet to manifest. The trajectory of the patriarchs is a mirror. Their challenges and triumphs are the germ of all future confrontations and redemptions. Centuries later, Christianity would re-embrace this foundation and call it typology. The Apostle Paul would affirm that the narratives of the Old Testament are not just a historical account, but an anticipation of greater realities. What happened in Abraham's tents is replicated on a grand scale in the metropolises and borders of the contemporary world. From this perspective, the story of Isaac and Ishmael ceases to be a mere domestic narrative. It is a prophetic map that clarifies why Jews and Arabs, Israel and the Muslim world, are destined to clash and, at the same time, to long for salvation. The promises, the challenges, and the separations of yesteryear constitute the spiritual DNA of today's conflicts. By grasping this truth, the deepest meaning of the conflict is revealed. It is not merely a struggle for land or power, but the perpetuation of a sacred dynamic that repeats from generation to generation until the predetermined moment for definitive reconciliation arrives. The question is, will we be able to perceive beyond the confrontation and seek the lesson bequeathed by our ancestors? Because in the memory of their existences lies the prophecy, and in the prophecy, the hope for a different future. The original wound and the birth of the conflict. The story of Abraham is a crucible where divine promise meets human sorrow. God gave him an incredible destiny. Nations will spring from you, and through your offspring all the families of the earth will be blessed. Yet Abraham and Sarah's daily life was marked by bitter infertility, a shadow of shame. Sarah, desperate from waiting, made a fateful decision that would shape the future of nations. She gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, seeking through tradition what faith seemed to deny her. From this union, Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, was born, a reflection of his parents' hopes and pain. But Ishmael's birth brought not peace, but a storm. Abraham's home filled with wary glances, resentment, and silences vaster than the desert itself. Hagar, now a mother, couldn't hide her pride from Sarah, who felt defeated. Sarah, hurt, turned her pain into harshness, and Hagar fled, alone, pregnant and lost, into the desert abyss. There, amidst the dust and heat, when all hope seemed to vanish, the narrative paused. A messenger of the Lord appeared by a spring, a heavenly sign in her utter despair. "Go back," he told her, "for I will multiply your descendants until they are too numerous to count. Your son will be named Ishmael, because God has heard your suffering." But with the promise came a prophetic revelation. He will be like a wild donkey among men. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in conflict with all his brothers. This wasn't a curse, but a description of an untamed nation, characterized by freedom and struggle, by blessing and confrontation. A community able to endure any oppression, yet also destined for fragmentation and ceaseless rivalry. Abraham, watching Ishmael thrive, felt the joy of a promise fulfilled, but also the burden of a grief that wouldn't easily heal. Because at the heart of every blessing lies a divine choice that surpasses human understanding. And so, conflict transformed into legacy, and hope into promise for both lineages. At that moment, a future was set that would echo through our times, a foundational wound to be remembered for generations. The birth of Isaac and the spiritual divide. Time marched on relentlessly. Abraham and Sarah grew old, surrounded by unresolved questions. For years, Ishmael was the only light in Abraham's home, the longed-for son, the patriarch's pride, the focus of all his hopes. But as days turned into years, God's promise seemed to dissipate with the desert wind, until, against all logic and reason, the impossible happened. One afternoon, while Abraham was showing hospitality to 3 enigmatic visitors, he heard words that would change the course of human existence. "Next year, your wife Sarah will have a son." Sarah, exhausted by waiting, overheard from her tent and burst into laughter, not of joy, but of bitter disbelief. The weight of her barrenness was more overwhelming than any expectation. But God does not forget his promises. Sarah, the woman who thought her own name a mockery, gave birth in her old age. The infant was named Isaac, he who laughs, a testament to his parents' improbable laughter and unwavering divine faithfulness. For a moment, Abraham's tent was filled with joy and celebration. However, harmony was fragile. At Isaac's weaning celebration, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking her younger brother. That scene was more than just child's play. It was a shadow of a spiritual struggle for the right to inheritance, for the future of a nation. The word used in the scriptures for mocking shares the same root as the name Isaac, as if Ishmael intended to usurp his brother's blessing and destiny. Sarah's heart couldn't bear it any longer. She demanded Hagar and Ishmael's expulsion. Abraham, torn between love for his son and God's voice, faced the hardest decision of his life. God told him, "Listen to Sarah, but don't worry about Ishmael. I will also make him into a great nation." In the cold light of morning, Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael away, giving them bread and water to face the desert. That physical separation was far more than a simple goodbye. It was the birth of a spiritual rift that still divides the world. Abraham's sorrow at seeing his son leave echoes like a wound that is never healed, the imperceptible cause of resentment and distrust between two peoples. For Ishmael and Hagar, exile meant losing a home, an identity, and hope. For Sarah and Abraham, the fulfillment of the promise also came at the cost of sacrifice. Thus, the separation was sealed, a divine choice, a painful expulsion, and two divergent destinies, yet intrinsically linked by blood and promise. Catastrophe and prophecy, the echo in our days. In the suffocating silence of the desert, Hagar and Ishmael wandered aimlessly, driven by the winds of fate. Their water soon ran out, hope faded under the relentless sun, and Ishmael's cries toward his mother's heart. In that abyss of loneliness and death, when all human capacity was extinguished, the unthinkable happened once more. An angel descended and opened Hagar's eyes so she could see a well of water. There, in the very desert where Ishmael's story seemed to end, the saga of a nation truly began. The angel not only saved him but reiterated the prophecy. "Do not be afraid, for God has heard the boy's voice. I will make him into a great nation." Thus, in the place of despair, hope emerged. Ishmael grew up in the desert, becoming an archer, a free man, patriarch of tribes that would populate the vast expanses of Arabia. But the promise also carried a warning. Ishmael would be strong, untamed, and his hand would be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He would not only face external adversaries, but also the suffering of internal divisions. This destiny, sealed since the dawn of history, has left its indelible mark on Arab communities. Internal conflicts, broken agreements, aspirations for power, and endless tragedies. The echo of Ishmael's exile reverberates in every exile, every diaspora, every descendant who feels that their identity has been stripped away. And it is here that history ceases to be a mere ancient narrative and transforms into a palpable prophecy. The expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael finds its contemporary reflection in the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948, the Nakba, when thousands of Arab families were displaced and felt stripped of their land and their past. Palestinian Nakba of 1948, when thousands of Arab families were displaced and felt their land and past snatched away. The conflict between Isaac and Ishmael isn't just a biblical anecdote. It's a shadow that stretches over every generation. It's the shared suffering and the cry for belonging from two peoples who claim the same legacy. In every failed negotiation, every barrier erected, every tear shed in the Holy Land, the voice of that angel is still heard. God has heard the lament of the young man. The promise endures, the wound remains open, and the prophecy awaits its fulfillment. The choice of the covenant and the divine enigma. Why did the eternal covenant fall upon Isaac and not upon Ishmael, the firstborn? This is an enigma that transcends human understanding and can only be grasped in the light of the divine. The scriptures are clear. God chose Isaac, the son of the promise, the one born from the miracle of inconceivable laughter when all human hope had vanished. Isaac was a living manifestation of God's supernatural intervention, proof that the divine purpose is not confined by human rules or the limitations of time. For Abraham, this choice was heartbreaking. He loved Ishmael with a father's strength. He saw in the future of his lineage and fulfillment of his aspirations. However, the covenant, that sacred and eternal alliance with the divine, was destined for the improbable son, for the one whose birth could only be explained by faith. Ishmael was not discarded or forgotten. God himself reaffirmed the promise. I will also make him a great nation. But while Isaac received the covenant, the spiritual inheritance, the promise of the chosen people, and a blessing that would transcend the centuries, Ishmael obtained earthly greatness, power, descendants, and territory. 12 princes would emerge from him, giving rise to formidable tribes, empires, and cultures that would shape the course of history. Ishmael's descendants proliferated in the desert, built civilizations, and developed an undeniable global influence. And yet, the fracture persisted. While Israel bore the identity of the covenant people, the Arab world flourished with its own blessing and with the seal of independence, resistance, and struggle. However, this divine decision, which to human eyes might seem arbitrary but is perfect in the eyes of God, sowed the seed of incomprehension and resentment. The notion of being chosen or excluded, of receiving the greater or lesser blessing, became the psychological and spiritual root of centuries of conflict. Here the true mystery of God is revealed. Not everything in life obeys merit, effort, or natural order. The sacred chooses paths that defy reason because ultimately, God's purpose is higher than any human understanding. And so, the story of Isaac and Ishmael transformed into the imperishable symbol of two destinies, one born a miracle, the other a perseverance, both grace, both loved, both marked by divine choice. A glimmer of hope in prophecy. Amidst centuries of rivalry, pain, and distances that seemed irreconcilable, the Bible holds a discreet, almost imperceptible scene, yet laden with prophetic message of hope. After a lifetime of divergent paths, when Abraham, the patriarch of promises, breathes his last, something sacred happens. Isaac and Ishmael, the brothers, estranged by fate, reunite at their progenitor's tomb. It is a moment of profound symbolism. For the first time since their separation, both sons converge, not as adversaries, but as brothers, united by grief and reverence. The sacred text highlights a detail. Ishmael, the elder, yields prominence to Isaac, the heir of the covenant, allowing his name to be mentioned first. For scholars, this simple act of humility and acceptance holds the key to all future reconciliation. That scene is not a mere funerary ritual. It is a palpable prophecy. The descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, Jews and Arabs, Israel and the Muslim world, are destined one day to meet in the same place. The tomb of their origin, the memory of a shared father. The reunion of the brothers hints at the possibility of genuine peace, a reconciliation that transcends politics and generations. Throughout history, this gesture has found contemporary echoes. When nations like the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain signed peace treaties with Israel, they did so not under the banner of power, but under the symbolic title of the Abraham Accords. It is an implicit recognition that, before being rivals, they are offspring of the same lineage, heirs of an ancient promise. In the deepest branches of both faiths, Jewish and Muslim mystics have discovered the same language of the soul. For Kabbalists and Sufis, the goal is not to defeat the other, but to dissolve the ego, unite with the divine, and reconnect to the essence of all existence. Both describe the ascent of the soul toward infinite light, the longing to return to the origin, the recognition that behind labels and differences there is a common spark, the fervent love for God. In the stillness of Abraham's tomb, conflict gives way to compassion, and ancestral rivalry transforms into the possibility of redemption. It is there that the prophecy of reconciliation begins to unfold, reminding us that the ultimate destiny of Abraham's children is not enmity, but unity in the sacred. While populations fought over territories and dominance, while borders hardened and ideologies erected new barriers, a silent understanding blossomed in the hidden core of both traditions. The search for God is deeper than any conflict, the mystical connection, and the hope for unity. In the gloom of distant nights, when all seems lost and history repeats itself in cycles of violence, mystics emerge. It is the Jewish Kabbalists and the Muslim Sufis who dare to look beyond the surface, to break the cycle of hatred and discover what unites rather than what divides. Both explore the journey of the soul. For Kabbalah, life is an ascent through spiritual levels, a ladder to infinite light. For Sufism, existence is a journey of the heart, where the ego dissolves and only the fervent love for God remains. Both describe the Creator as a boundless light and human beings as a spark of that same light, lost and longing to return to their origin. The language of love is fundamental in these mystical paths. They speak of a love that transcends all logic, a love that is a living flame, and a desire for total union with the divine. When the search for God is authentic, the labels of Jew or Muslim become insignificant in the face of the intensity of the sacred. In the hidden history of peoples, the great sages and poets from both sides often found a common language. They exchanged visions, longings, and even words, recognizing that the thirst of the divine is universal and that the ultimate purpose is the same: to unite with the Father of all, the God of Abraham. Thus, in the deepest recesses, while on the surface the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael clash, beneath the fertile ground of mysticism, the human soul remembers its shared origin of humility, and acceptance holds the key to all future reconciliation. That scene isn't merely a funerary ceremony. It's a palpable prophecy. The descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, Jews and Arabs, Israel and the Muslim world, are destined one day to meet at the same place. The tomb of their origin, the memory of a shared father, the reunion of the brothers hints at the possibility of genuine peace, a reconciliation that transcends politics and generations. Throughout history, this gesture has found contemporary echoes. When nations like the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain signed peace treaties with Israel, they did so not under the banner of power, but under the symbolic appellation of the Abraham Accords. It's an implicit recognition that, before being rivals, they are offspring of the same lineage, heirs of an ancient promise. In the deepest branches of both faiths, Jewish and Muslim mystics have discovered the same language of the spirit. For Kabbalists and Sufis, the goal isn't to overcome the other, but to dissolve the ego, merge with the divine, and reconnect in the essence of all existence. Both describe the soul's ascent towards unlimited light, the yearning to return to the origin, the recognition that beyond labels and differences, there's a common spark, the ardent love for God. In the solace of Abraham's tomb, conflict yields to compassion, and ancestral rivalry becomes a possibility of redemption. It is there that the prophecy of reconciliation begins to become reality, reminding us of the ultimate destiny of Abraham's children isn't enmity, but unity in the sacred. While populations disputed territories and dominion, while borders became more rigid and ideologies erected new barriers, in the hidden core of both traditions a silent understanding flourished. The search for God is deeper than any conflict, the mystical connection, and the hope for unity. In the gloom of distant nights, when all seems lost and history repeats itself in cycles of violence, mystics emerge. It is the Jewish Kabbalists and the Muslim Sufis, who dare to look beyond the superficial, to break the cycle of hatred and discover what unites rather than what separates. Both explore the journey of the soul. For Kabbalah, life is an ascent through spiritual levels, a ladder towards infinite light. For Sufism, existence is a journey of the heart, where the ego dissolves and only the ardent love for God endures. Both describe the Creator as a boundless light and human beings as a spark of that same light, lost and yearning to return to their origin. The language of love is fundamental in these mystical paths. They speak of a love that transcends all logic, a love that is a living flame, and a desire for total union with the divine. When the search for God is authentic, the labels of Jew or Muslim become insignificant in the face of the intensity of the sacred. In the hidden history of peoples, the great sages and poets from both sides frequently found a shared language. They exchanged visions, longings, and even words, recognizing that the hunger for the divine is universal and that the ultimate purpose is the same: to unite with the Father of all, the God of Abraham. Thus, in the deepest recesses, while on the surface the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael clash, beneath the fertile earth of mysticism, the human soul remembers its shared origin. Because the greatest triumph lies not in conquering Jerusalem, but in conquering the heart, in letting love overcome the wound, in remembering that, before being adversaries, we were brothers seeking the same light, Christ, the bridge to reconciliation. In the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael, the cycle of suffering and separation seemed inescapable. But Christian faith introduces a transformative solution: Jesus, the Son of God, not just as a prophet or teacher, but as the entrance to a completely renewed humanity. For early Christians, the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael represented the essential division of humanity. However, Paul the Apostle writes an astonishing truth. In Christ, those historical and spiritual barriers vanish. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. All of you are one in Christ Jesus. Christ is peace materialized. His mission was not to take sides or reopen old wounds, but to establish a universal family, a community where ancestral identities would no longer be the primary source of discord. In Christ, spiritual identity transcends blood ties, nation, and genealogy. The wall of hatred and suspicion that separated Isaac and Ishmael transforms into a bridge of reconciliation. The message is unmistakable. The new family of God is accessible to all, regardless of whether their lineage comes from promise or desert, covenant or seeking. Jesus is described in the Scriptures as the Prince of Peace. His peace is not superficial, nor is its silence imposed by force, but profound transformation of hearts and minds. The cycle of animosity that began with the brothers' rivalry can only be broken by an act of supernatural love. Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, is a radical proposition, unattainable for human pride, but achievable by divine grace. Thus, the coming of Jesus does not cancel history or ignore suffering, but redeems both, inviting Jews and Arabs, descendant of Isaac and Ishmael, to find a new beginning in the family of faith. From the Christian perspective, reconciliation does not depend on political agreements or temporary treaties, but on a deep spiritual transformation where all the children of Abraham can recognize their brotherhood and embrace the divine destiny of unity. The supreme hope of reconciliation, the saga of Isaac and Ishmael, of their descendants and their conflicts, seems an unending cycle of conflict and separation. However, the Scriptures, both Hebrew and Christian, do not end their message in tragedy, but open a window to supreme hope, definitive reconciliation. According to Christian vision, a day will come when division will cease to exist. The Bible promises that with the glorious return of Jesus, the Prince of Peace, the walls of hatred will fall, and all humanity will be called to a new era of understanding and affection. It will be a moment where the wolf will live with the lamb, where the ancient cycle of vengeance and rivalry will be transformed by the presence of God on earth.